What's going on, guys? Welcome into another edition of the Fantasy Slant, brought to you by Pro Football Focus and powered by the same, yours truly, Pro Football Focus. As usual, we have the PFF roundtable here. We have Brandon Marianne Lee, Nathan Jahnke, and Daniel Kelley here with me to talk about the Week 6 waiver wire. But first, let's talk about the week that was, Week 5. It was a weird week, and it ended on a sour note, guys. That game last night, Nathan, were you tracking that game with the snaps? Because, I feel bad for people that were subjected to watch that entire game last night.
Yeah, I was tracking that. We're trying to do everything with the night games live, and just watching that first drive the first 10 minutes of the game, and it's like, okay, it's going to be one of these games. It was going really fast at first, but then it slowed down as the rest of the game went on, and you would wish the star players on both of those teams would have been healthy, so we would have had a better game than we did.
Yeah, definitely. Jacquizz Rodgers, 35 touches. That was the second most by a running back this year. I don't know if I ever want to watch a game where Jacquizz Rodgers has the second most touches of the season. Brandon, your beloved Broncos, they fell to the Falcons. Any big takeaways from that game for you?
Other than, like I've said, Trevor Siemian is the starting quarterback of the Denver Broncos. Is that the only takeaway?
Yeah, I think you have to consider at this point. Paxton Lynch didn't look nearly as good as he did, in relief.
I just think we need to stop always second-guessing people. Paxton Lynch is going to be fine. I don't have a problem with him long-term, but he certainly, is not the starter for this team this year. It is Trevor Siemian. They went undefeated with him. He has made mistakes. Don't get me wrong. It's not like Trevor Siemian's going to go to the Pro Bowl this year, probably. Who knows? With the way injuries are going, it could be anyone. But, I just think that was excruciatingly clear.
Yeah, no, it definitely was. And that's the thing. I like my quarterbacks, when a team drafts a quarterback, I prefer them to sit on the bench for a year like Trevor Siemian did, like Jared Goff is kind of done. I know Goff is going to start at some point, but I don't want him to. I prefer them to sit back and take the pace of the NFL game and just watch. So Lynch was kind of forced into it, so I'm not going to base judgment yet. Daniel, did you have any big takeaways from Week 5? Anything that really shocked you about what kind of took place?
No, not really. I think it was pretty business as usual across most of them, except for the Lynch-Siemian thing that you guys already touched on.
It did. Outside of the fact that Eli Manning, he didn't have the game that I thought he would on Sunday night. But I did write a piece today that went up on Pro Football Focus, the Fantasy Stock Market, where I urge you to read it because Eli Manning, and it's a free article. So if you guys are listening to this podcast, you don't have a PFF Gold subscription, we've made that article free this week. If you go there and look at that, Eli Manning's numbers are eerily similar, like almost identical to the last 2 years where he threw 35 and 30 touchdowns. He hasn't thrown the touchdowns yet, but everything else is in place. I urge you to go read that. But this show isn't about talking about, who to trade for or whatnot. We're talking about waiver wire additions. And this week is one where it's really deep. There's not really many names that kind of jump out to you that said, I need to go and get that person. So before we get into it, I know that we were talking about before we actually go live on the show. We were talking a little bit about strategy, and basically, this is a week where we feel you don't need to go out and spend much of your fab. If you guys are running a free agent acquisition budget, don't use that. More sit back and wait and see who people drop in order to pick up someone, that we're going to talk about today. There's some big names that'll be dropped. I think it's one of those weeks, but we're going to talk about every name in case you do want to pick up someone you're wondering who to start. As always, we start with quarterback. Daniel, let's start with you. We're going to go and talk about Colin Kaepernick because I think we have to. It's really not a big waiver wire week for quarterbacks. Nobody really got hurt of significance. But Colin Kaepernick, they're talking about the 49ers coaches are supposed to meet today, talk about who's going to be starting. I happen to believe they're going to go Kaepernick here instead of Christian Ponder. Does Kaepernick hold any value just because he runs the ball?
In one league, I have Andrew Luck as my only quarterback, and that's terrifying with the way he's getting beat up. And so I picked up a backup, and my backup is Colin Kaepernick. I'm not counting on anything there. It's a long shot still. But of all the quarterbacks who are down in that area, he easily has the highest ceiling. We saw what he could do 2 years ago, and sure, last year everything fell apart, and there's a chance he comes back and he's exactly as bad as he was last year, and we move on from him. But if you're going to be trolling down in that area for a backup or a down-the-road bye-week fill-in, there's no higher ceiling.
Yeah, like the part with me that I'm worried about, Nathan, I'm going to go to you on this because you might know a little bit more than me. Like, so the 49ers snap counts have been down from traditional Chip Kelly offenses. Traditionally, he's been running 68 to 70 plays per game. The last I checked, I think the 49ers are only running 63-ish plays per game. Does that affect Colin Kaepernick's stock? Do you think it has to do with Blaine Gabbert and them trying to slow down the pace? Like, what do you think the problem is with this Chip Kelly offense? Or is it just the talent in the offense?
Yeah, I think the Chip Kelly offense, they still want to run as many plays as they possibly can. I think last week they did run a lot of plays. I think the only reason they hadn't been in previous games is just they haven't had the skill to get long drives going. It's been a lot of 3-and-outs, so that prevents the long drives from happening. So if Kaepernick is able to do well, then that could help get the plays up since they'll still try to run that fast pace. So if everything goes well, this does have a high upside, but if Kaepernick's the player that we saw the last 2 years, then I could still see a lot of 3-and-outs and the 49ers not being on the offense as much, which will drag everything down.
Yeah, so I mean, if you're in a 2-quarterback league, it's definitely worth something to like kind of take a look at, I guess, with Kaepernick, because we know he has a floor with his rushing ability. But let's move into some streaming options this week, because that's what a lot of people go to the waiver wire for. Streaming quarterback has kind of become the new thing to do. Brandon, I talked about you on the Sunday show. I don't know if you listened, but I said that you were probably out celebrating, drinking somewhere, that Ryan Tannehill fell flat on his face last week. But, you know, I don't know if you're the right person to ask about Ryan Tannehill, but he is playing against Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh has allowed at least 15 fantasy points to each of the last 4 quarterbacks that they've played, and that included, you know, Alex Smith, Ryan Fitzpatrick. So do you think that Ryan Tannehill is a decent streaming option this week, despite your love for him?
Really? That's how we're going to start me on the show? We're going to start with the
Why
Ryan
would you
Tannehill
do
question.
this?
This is well, the thing is that, you know, 15 points doesn't really impress me personally. I think that his upside is 15 points at this point. When your coach has to come out and say that you're the starting quarterback when there's pretty much no option behind you, I think it's a bad sign. I think there are better options out there. I know that we have Brian Hoyer that we're going to discuss him. You know, this guy has 20-point upside. To me, that's a huge difference. And I just Marcus Mariota, I'm a little bit worried about, but you know, he had 3 touchdowns, but he didn't even get to 200 yards last week. So I just want to pump the brakes a little bit there. So, yeah, I just, again, the guy threw 2 interceptions and fumbled the ball against the Cleveland Browns. It's difficult for me to say he's going to play well in any matchup. Now, he did get over 300 yards, but it's still basically showed us who he is statistically and fantasy-wise. And, of course, since then, it's just been an implosion. I'm worried about this offense in general. I'm worried because I own Jarvis Landry. I'm worried because I have some Devontae Parker and Kenny Stills in my life. I don't want – I mean, gosh, even Jay Ajayi, it's just –
I think Foster might come back this week. I know he was practicing a little bit last week, so I tend to think that Foster will be back, which should help Tannehill a little bit, ease the pressure off him. Ajayi did play better last week. We're going to talk about him in a moment. But Daniel, she mentioned Brian Hoyer. You know, John Fox has come out. Before the game, it came out that basically this was Brian Hoyer's job to lose. Then you saw Cutler standing on the sideline. Basically, he did not want to be bothered. You could tell he was irritated. And then after the game, when Brian Hoyer actually played a decent game, and I watched the entire game, he played a decent game. John Fox is now saying Jay Cutler's hurt. That's why Jay Cutler's not playing. Brian Hoyer versus Jacksonville. It's not the greatest matchup. What are your thoughts on Brian Hoyer?
You said Jay Cutler looks like he wasn't interested. How can you tell? That's Jay Cutler. It's his face. I mean, as long as you have Hoyer, if you've been running him out so far, there's no reason for the Bears to go away from him. They have no love lost for Jay Cutler at this point, and if they can find someone who can play who's not Jay Cutler, I think they'd go for that. I know their fans would. You know, we've seen him in spurts before, and if he falls apart, nobody's going to be flabbergasted by any means. But as long as he's going, you ride the wave. He's got the Jaguars, who aren't as bad as the Jaguars have been in the past, but they're not a scary matchup by any means. I'm happy to keep running Hoyer out there in any league where I've been running him out there already.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's the thing. It's just, you know, Jay, it is what it is. I don't want to get on a rant about Jay Cutler and the backup quarterback in Chicago, because if you're from Chicago, if you know Chicago, the backup quarterback is always the best quarterback in Chicago, according to the fans, that is, of course. But the biggest streaming option this week, and one where I'm having difficulty with because I don't know if I can completely trust him, but Nathan, maybe you'll be able to help me. Marcus Mariota is going against, every week I've been saying, stream the quarterback that's playing the Browns. And I know Mariota's coming off a 3-touchdown game. I understand that. But I feel like this is a week where Cleveland, man, they're such a good matchup. They've allowed multiple touchdowns in 12 of their last 13 games. We just saw them be annihilated by Tom Brady. But isn't this a game where it sets up for DeMarco Murray to carry the ball a ton?
I think they'll still be throwing a lot since the Cleveland Browns, we make fun of them a lot, and they have a lot worse of a coverage unit than they do a run defense. Their run defense has looked decent this year. So if you want to take advantage of Cleveland the most, it's taking advantage of their defensive back. So that would mean plenty of throws for Mariota. So I could see him having a good game. He's coming off of his best game, even though he didn't put up the passing yards. If I was to take one quarterback this week, it would probably be Tannehill. One thing going back to him a little bit, all quarterbacks are better without pressure than they are with pressure, but the gap for Tannehill is bigger than most quarterbacks, and I don't think Tannehill will be under pressure much in this one. The Steelers will likely be without Cameron Hayward, their best pass rusher, so I could see Tannehill not being under pressure much, and that should really help him out. So if I would only take one quarterback this week, it'd be Tannehill, but I think Mariota would also have a good matchup against the Browns.
That's interesting. I like what you added there in regards to Hayward being out in the pass rush, getting to Tannehill and that. Like I said, I do think that if Arian Foster comes back, it does help Tannehill with an extra safety valve. But Brandon, so I don't just touch quarterbacks with you with Ryan Tannehill. Let's talk about Alex Smith. He's going to be playing. I don't even know if we could talk about Alex Smith very much. He's just a very unappetizing option. He doesn't offer very much upside. I know you were just saying that Tannehill doesn't do much for you, but does Alex Smith do anything for you?
No, I mean, not really. I will say that Oakland, again, is a good matchup. So, man, the implosion of San Diego, am I right? Just what? Their fourth quarter is so tragic for real football. But I think that, this is going to be an okay game. I kind of like him coming off the bye. There's always the possibility that he could run in for a touchdown. Now, here's the thing. He's only thrown 5 touchdowns on the season, but he has run in 1 in those 4 games. So there's a 25% chance that he does that, which would definitely help him. And, he sneaky gets in there with decent numbers. I think actually the floor is really high against Oakland, especially because it's a divisional game. They're going to come out there guns a-blazing. Jamal Charles hopefully will be full go, because obviously they didn't want to play him last week. That was strictly because Charkandrick West couldn't play. I do think that Spencer Ware fumbling in the last 3 games is going to be rough for him to say that he should still have the starting position. So, but I think this is good for everyone. I think that he'll get rotated in as well. It's going to work out for the team. So yeah, I think actually if I'm looking for someone with a high floor, because I have pretty decent options everywhere else, I think Alex Smith might be your guy.
Alex Smith, I think he's a high floor option. She talked about the floor against the Raiders. Just know that every quarterback not named Marcus Mariota has totaled at least 22 fantasy points against those Raiders. Moving on to the running backs, this is not a big running back week, but one name that's been out there, Daniel, is Dion Lewis. And I know that I've added him in a couple leagues just here and there just because I feel like running back is so desolate right now. I mean, it's hard to find 30 running backs that you would actually feel comfortable starting, in a flex spot. Dion Lewis obviously would fill that role. Are you adding him in any leagues, or have we not heard enough about his return? He's eligible to return, not this week, but next week, but we don't know if he's actually going to return. What's your take on Dion Lewis?
In a vacuum, I'm happy to pick up Lewis. We've seen what he did, and James White, he's only had 1 game with Tom Brady, but James White hasn't lived up to my expectations. My problem with picking up Lewis right now is the thing you said before about running backs. It's so bad right now that you kind of need every running back spot in your roster for even potential. I've seen people starting DeAndre Washington and Cameron Artis-Payne and Dwayne Washington before he got hurt. So the problem with picking up Dion Lewis is it's a dead roster spot, at least until he's back, and there's a lot of people who can't afford that. If you can afford it, absolutely, but that's a tough ask.
It is, but that's the thing. I know you touched on James White, and he was a disappointment in, playing with Garoppolo and Brissett, but Honestly, I take notes watching every single game on Sundays, and one of the notes I took is that James White is still underrated. Like, the guy is really, really good at football. I think that he might be just as good as Dion Lewis. And I know that a lot of people will hate on me for that, but I think James White is a very fantastic athlete, and I think he fits that offense just as good as Dion Lewis does. That's my only concern, is that if he keeps playing, he played really, really well this week. So I do enjoy him. Nathan, do you like James White as much as I do, or do you think this is Dion Lewis's show once he comes back?
Yeah, I like James White as much as you do. I think he's been doing really well when he's been targeted. I'm concerned about Lewis's role when he comes back because I think Blunt's a better runner and I think White's a better receiver. And I think Lewis is a better all-around back, but I'm just not sure what exactly his role will be depending on how healthy he gets. And even when Lewis was healthy a year ago and playing, the Patriots have better receiving options now than they did back then. They have Bennett at tight end. They have Hogan at wide receiver to go along with their other good receiving options. So I'm just not sure how many touches he'll get even if he is healthy.
Yeah, no, and it could turn into a messy situation. Coming into the last couple of years, the Patriots running back situation has always been a headache to deal with. I think LeGarrette Blount is the only one that we could actually feel comfortable starting on a weekly basis. Brandon, someone that we might be able to pick up and spot start in Week 6 is James Starks. Eddie Lacy, I know they came out and said that his ankle is just fine. Like, they said it in quotations, like, it's fine. It's not good. I actually seem to think that this could be a situation similar to last year where sometimes Eddie Lacy was active and he just didn't play very many snaps. There were 7 games last year where James Starks seen 10 or more carries. In those games, he scored 8.6 or more fantasy points in 6 of them. So is James Starks someone people should run to pick up? Basically, if you need a running back now, would you pick him up over someone like Dion Lewis or Bilal Powell?
No. He kind of like Randall Cobb, if you watch the tape, is not the same player. He's averaging 1.8 yards per carry. He's had about half of the amount of carries as Eddie Lacy. So Eddie Lacy has 54 carries on the season for 295 yards, but James Starks has 23 carries for 42 yards. No touchdowns. He's had a drop. He is not the same player, in my opinion. There's nothing dynamic or interesting there that's going to get me excited. This week they're going up against Dallas. He got a lot of touches at the end of the game, and he did nothing with them this week. It just seems to be the constant story so far this year for James Starks. So I think this is going to be a tough sell for me personally. I would rather have Bilal Powell.
Bilal Powell, now I'm going to stay with you, Brendan. I'm going to ask you about Bilal Powell. After he played just 22% of the snaps in the first 2 weeks, over the last 3, here's his snap counts. He's played 40%, 54%, and then 46%. He's received exactly 10 touches in each of the last 3 games. I happen to think that Bilal Powell is now in the flex conversation. I do believe that he is starter worthy every week. I think Matt Forte, they continue to decrease his workload. I know you're a big Matt Forte supporter, but how do you feel about Bilal Powell right now?
Well, Matt Forte's hurt. And he's one of those players that's, multidimensional. If he's hurt, he is not the same player. So it's kind of like Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson's hurt. I can't talk about him either. It just is what it is. But luckily, he's getting better. Matt Forte's not getting better right now. So as far as I'm concerned, this is a shift that's taking place based off of health, and I feel fine about it. But I think Bilal Powell's 30 targets so far this season is real. Definitely if you play in a PPR league, he can be in the flex conversation. If you're playing in standard, he's really had kind of mediocre numbers. Frankly, it hasn't been very impressive. So this is why you should always know your league, check your settings, and then make a decision as to whether or not you start him. But yes, I do think that he will continue to get more and more involved in the game plan. As you said, the snap counts don't lie.
Yeah, so I think Brandon and I are in agreement that Bilal Powell is a better pickup than James Starks. Even if it's just for this week, it might be you might get a similar value this week, and then it's more value going forward. All right, so Daniel, let's talk about Jay Ajayi. I mentioned that I do believe Arian Foster is coming back this week. It's not a guarantee. It's never a guarantee with Arian Foster. Jay Ajayi, I think he kind of showed himself, and I think he worked his way into the lead running back if for some reason Foster's out of the picture. What is your take on Jay Ajayi? Is he someone that you think is rosterable, or do you think it's just back to the waiver wire you go until another Arian Foster injury occurs?
Pretty much that. They are finally going to Ajayi because they didn't have a choice. They still don't want to. Foster is going to be the bell cow when he gets back, as long as he can stay healthy. And Ajayi is another one. If you have room to stash him and wait for a Foster injury, sure, it can't hurt. He's better than Damian Williams. He's better than whoever else they have down there. But he's not going to be the main guy unless Foster is hurt again. So it's a dead roster spot that I don't know if people can afford.
Yeah, so you're basically saying only in deeper leagues where you have big benches where you can stash Jay Ajayi, but if you have shallow benches, there's no reason to keep him there. Even though he's broken 6 tackles in the last 2 weeks on 19 carries, there's actually no running back who has broken more tackles on fewer carries than Jay Ajayi has. So he's running the ball extremely well. But Nathan, I saved this player for you because I wanted to hear about the splits in between Jaylen Reagor and DeAndre Washington. There's a lot of people out there confused by this. There's people asking me now, okay, DeAndre Washington I could just drop. Is Jaylen Reagor in it? How do you feel about this entire backfield?
Yeah, I wouldn't be adding Jaylen right now. He only saw 23 of a possible 72 snaps, and that's with Murray out this past week. He was just targeted on half the pass routes he ran roughly. So typically any receiver, no matter how good you are, if you're catching or if you're seeing targets on half your pass routes 1 week, you're not going to see that again the next week. And then once Murray's back, Murray will continue to see a lot of the playing time. So I just don't think Jaylen will see the playing time to get the numbers that he saw this past week.
Yeah, he still has just 1 game over 6 carries. It was more of a product of Murray being inactive. And honestly, I have no idea how long Murray's going to be out, but a lot of people did say that this week, if anything, was just a job security thing for Latavius Murray and the fact that Jaylen Reagor and DeAndre Washington didn't quite live up to expectations.
Not quite.
I don't know if we hold on. So I don't know. I think we can collectively just answer this one together. So Jacquizz Rodgers, he had 35 touches. I laugh every time I think about it. He had 35 touches in last night's game, but they're going on their bye. Doug Martin's due back. I know that Charles Sims went on IR, but I mean, for me, I'm not picking up Jacquizz Rodgers. Are you guys picking up Jacquizz Rodgers? Brandon, let's just start with you. Is there anything here?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm picking up Jacquizz Rodgers. I have already. I'm gonna ride that pony. If they're gonna ride the pony, I'm gonna ride the pony. You know what I'm saying? Like, come on, it's Dyer out there. He at least is gonna get the touches as long as Doug Martin's still out. Now we don't know what's gonna happen with Doug Martin this particular week and moving forward, and who knows? But we do know that Charles Sims is out for the season, and they've been doing a 1-2 punch for a long time. Now, is Jacquizz Rodgers Charles Sims? No, absolutely not. But they need to run the ball. I mean, they were. What do we say about the game last night? I don't know what to say, but I will say that Tampa Bay throughout the season has been struggling. Jameis Winston's been struggling. He had one really great game, but since then it's kind of been up and down for them in a way that has been uncomfortable. They need a run game.
Yeah.
I think this is a necessity thing. This is kind of like Latavius Murray. Everyone wants to say they're done with Latavius Murray, but he's the guy who's going to get the majority of the touches, the majority of the snaps, the majority of the yards, and the majority of the touchdowns. At some point, you have to say, well, I guess that has some value to fantasy owners. Whether or not I think he's a great football player is not even what we're talking about right now. We're talking about usage. And if he's going to get 35 touches in a game, even when Doug Martin comes back, he may still get 10 to 15. That's crazy.
It is crazy. And for me, like when I heard about Sims going to the IR, for me, it says, and if you guys can go out there right now and trade for Doug Martin, I believe Doug Martin is a top-tier RB1 right now. I don't think you can dismiss that. I mean, they're going on their bye this week. He's had plenty of time. They've taken it easy with him. I think he comes back after the bye week, and I think that he's their bell cow. For me, I think Jacquizz Rodgers is going to see, maybe 5 to 7 touches a game, but I do think that this is the Doug Martin show going forward. Daniel,
but I will say, though, we're sitting here telling everyone to pick up DeAndre Washington, who's getting 5 to 7 touches at most a game. Right?
But I think he's talented. I think that's the difference here. Is I think that we think that DeAndre Washington's actually a talented running back, whereas Jacquizz Rodgers, we know what Jacquizz Rodgers is, right? Like that's my issue with him, is that I'm not going to pick up a journeyman who is going to see 5 to 7 touches a game with no potential. Like his potential is last night. Like that's his max potential, and like
that was pretty good.
He saw 35 touches. What did he end with yardage wise?
Well, yeah. I mean, it wasn't gorgeous.
Yeah.
Sure. But James Starks is putting up 1.8 yards per carry. You know what I'm saying? And we got a Jaylen Reagor, Olawale, DeAndre Washington, Latavius Murray quadruple thing going on. I'm just saying it's dire. I don't want to act like I'm a Jacquizz Rodgers believer here. I don't want to be like this, but I'm saying come on.
You've been dubbed the Jacquizz Rodgers supporter on the show.
People send me messages about Tannehill and Jacquizz Rodgers. Sad.
Speaking of horrendous timeshares, Matt Asiata, 18 touches last week. Now, Daniel, is this a concern going forward for Jerick McKinnon? What do you think, or was this a 1 week thing?
It's always been a concern as far as McKinnon's concerned. We know that Asiata is going to be the touchdown vulture when it gets close most of the time. I had McKinnon starting in one league, and we were watching that game. When it got close, I said, nope, I'm done. I still would rather have McKinnon than Asiata, but honestly, it's enough to make me not want to use either one of them because one is going to get a few touchdowns every now and then. The other's going to get the yards. Neither one's going to accumulate that many points.
More on the Sunday night show called him Matt Asiata. And I told him I kind of like that name. I think this is a one-off situation. Nathan, what's your take on the Asiata thing? Do you think – I just feel like the Vikings, it was a blowout. They didn't need to use McKinnon very much. This team has suffered so many injuries. They were missing a left and a right tackle during the game. I think it was a 1 week situation. What say you?
Yeah, I don't think this situation has really changed. Even though he had 15 carries, McKinnon had 20 carries. It was just the Vikings were winning, so they were running even more than usual. So it'll still be McKinnon seeing more of the carries, more of the catches, and then Matt taking the touchdowns here and there. So it'll still be a not ideal situation where the lead running back isn't the one who's getting the goal line carries.
Yeah, no, like I said, Asiata, I don't pick him up. I don't think that's why I didn't really want to talk about him too much. The same thing with Bobby Rainey and Paul Perkins. I think Rashad Jennings is due back this week. I just think it's a messy timeshare that I don't want to cover too much. I'd rather move on to the receivers because I do believe that there are some good wide receiver additions this week. First, let's get a word from our sponsors. All right, guys, so we're back. We have the wide receivers up next for us. And the wide receivers, it was kind of a big week. So I wanted to spend some time on the wide receivers here. And let's start right at the top. Brandon, let's go to you. Sammie Coates, he had a fantastic fantasy day. There's no disputing that. We know that. He won people some leagues. I think he won the Millionaire Maker on DraftKings. We know that. But did he really have a good game? And was it more a product of volume? Was it a fact of the Jets, it's the Jets. What is your take on Sammie Coates? I've had people asking me if he's a wide receiver 2 going forward.
Well, that's extreme, but I would say, I wrote about this all last week where I was like, each week I say, oh, it's just this week, or it's crazy, or, it's just the big plays, but every week he does it. So, but the drops concern me. I don't know how you can't be concerned about the drops. There's certainly some issues there. But, it's the same thing that people are concerned about Jesse James, and he keeps scoring touchdowns. I mean, at some point you have to look at the volume and say to yourself, okay, well, I think that's okay. Sammie Coates will be a fantastic bye-week fill-in for the remainder of the bye weeks. But do I want him to be one of my number one guys? Not quite sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure. We have a noise coming in. I'm not sure. Do you guys hear that noise?
I do. What is that?
Sounds like a washing machine. There, it stopped. Oh, it's back. I don't know what it is right now.
It does. It sounds like a washing machine.
You guys can hear. It's a technical difficulty we're having for a moment. I think we just lost Daniel, so I'm not sure if that's it. But Sammie Coates, for me,
I think it's Nathan. Sorry, Nathan.
It is.
Oh, yeah, he just muted. Yeah, so he's muted. All right, so Nathan, we're going to try and figure that out with Nathan. It's something there. No, yeah, it's definitely there. But sorry about that, guys. But yeah, Sammie Coates for me, he dropped, well, you could argue about it, what it was, 4 or 5 passes. Regardless, he didn't have a great game. The Jets had been allowing the most yards per target of all wide receivers. Like, it was a dream matchup for the entire Steelers roster. And, I don't want to take much from it. He's in my sell high right now. I think that if people are out there thinking that he's a legitimate wide receiver 2, I think you need to take advantage of it. It's not to say that it's not to say you should give him away or anything like that. But what it is to say is that I believe that he's a boomer bust wide receiver 3. Does that sound about right, Brandon?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that matchup was beautiful. I told people to start him in DFS. I started him in DFS. I started him in leagues where I had bye week issues. Absolutely. He was perfect. But do I think that that's going to happen every week? No, because they're not playing the Jets every week. And it's just unfortunate what's going on with the Jets. But I think this is something that we need to look for moving forward with other wide receivers. And kind of, especially when you're looking for those bargain players or those bye week fill-ins or what have you, it's always good to look at the match. Matchup is so important for those players. It's different for your studs. And we always say that. And that's because people are able to have those bounce back weeks, those big boom or bust. The boom is always against these like really, really bad struggling defenses. And unfortunately, the Jets are one of those.
Yeah, no, that's the thing is you target that matchup. Another matchup that kind of took place this weekend that a lot of people have asked me about, and it's still a bit early for me. Cameron Meredith had a fantastic game, guys. He finishes the 5th best fantasy wide receiver, 9 catches, 136 yards, and a touchdown from Brian Hoyer. But it was a fantastic matchup against the Colts. You know, Vontae Davis was shadowing Alshon Jeffrey. Whatever's going on with Alshon Jeffrey, it seemed to clear up a little bit in the second half. He did receive 5 targets in the second half. But Cameron Meredith is the story here. He saw 12 targets. While Nathan, you still had that sound. I'm not sure if we might just lose you for until we figure it out. But Brandon, let's go back to you. And what's your thoughts on Cameron Meredith? There's a lot of people asking me whether you'd rather own, Sammie Coates, Cameron Meredith, or Davante Adams for that matter. Which of these receivers is the one that gets your motor going?
Man, I guess I think that we have to look at Cameron Meredith now that Kevin White's out. He didn't play in that many snaps prior to this. So in week 3, he played 14 of 68. Week 4, 26 of 71. But then last week, 63 of 68. I mean, what a huge difference. And then, of course, he puts up, obviously, his best numbers. I think this has to be legitimate. He also took away a lot of the Eddie Royal work that had been going on, right? I don't know what's going on with Alshon, though. I am concerned.
Yeah.
I'm concerned, I think, about the Bears offense in general. I'm not quite sure what's going on there, other than I'm glad I have Jordan Howard in a ton of leagues. And, clearly we have to take notice of Cameron Meredith. I'm being asked over and over again whether I want Cameron Meredith or Hogan the rest of the season. What would you say?
That's a good question. For me, it'd probably be Hogan. I think it's just because of the team situation. I think I'd look for higher touchdown upside.
Better quarterback.
Yeah, better quarterback. Whenever you're looking for consistency, that's why for me, when someone asked me about Cameron Meredith or Davante Adams, I said it'd probably be Adams for me. Just because Aaron Rodgers is going to throw 30-plus touchdowns. He's not the full-time player necessarily that Cameron Meredith is going to be, because Cameron Meredith has essentially taken over the Kevin White role, and that's an every down player. Eddie Royal comes in on 3 wide receiver sets. Alshon Jeffrey's out there, and we know though, Brandon, that Alshon Jeffrey's not the most healthy individual. He's still dealing with lower body injuries. Alshon Jeffrey. So I obviously, like I said, I watched that whole game. I'm a Bears fan. Alshon Jeffrey, a lot of people were wondering if he was hurt, but I told people it's not that. He's playing 90% of the snaps. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's John Fox saying, well, since you're not practicing, we're not going to involve you in game plans. I don't know if that's the case, but Alshon Jeffrey definitely looked healthy. When he was targeted in the second half, he went up to get balls. He looked like he looked like the Alshon Jeffrey we all know and we all love.
But that's even more concerning to me.
It is. It
is worse that he looks okay.
That's the weird part. Is like when he went up there and he got up and he's getting emotional, and it was just like, I gotta know what's going on there. I don't know what's going on. Brian Hoyer hasn't targeted him as much as Jay Cutler did. I don't know if Cutler coming back would help. I tend to think it would. Jay Cutler tends to lock onto his number 1 guy, and Alshon Jeffrey is that. So. Cameron Meredith, I am in a little bit of a wait-and-see mode, but you can't do that on waivers. I think he's a speculative ad. But for me, Chris Hogan's the guy. I think Chris Hogan is the one that I would grab of the two.
However, I do want to say, you're not going to play Cleveland every week. And Cleveland's secondary is a disaster. And it's Tom Brady's first game back, of course. I think people now are like, that's it. Martellus Bennett's going to be a tight end 1 the rest of the season. And everybody's going to catch touchdowns. It's just the greatest. But look at their upcoming schedule. It's incredibly difficult. Seattle Seahawks, the Denver Broncos during your fantasy playoffs. I mean, there are some tough teams that they're going to face out there. And I just don't think everyone's going to get fed. So just FYI, that's why I'm kind of like, I guess I wouldn't take him, but also would feel great if I did get Cameron Meredith on my team, because as far as I'm concerned, he's obviously filling in for Kevin White, and he's better than Kevin White.
I'm not going to go that far. I'm not going to say he's better than Kevin White yet.
As a fantasy option, he is.
Well, obviously,
that's
so
not
far,
even debatable.
I think Cameron Meredith scored more points in the one game than Kevin White had this season, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so.
Yeah, but Chris Hogan, I think he's kind of taken on the Brandon LaFell role in this offense, and Chris Hogan is a better receiver than Brandon LaFell. I think you and I could agree there.
Yes.
Of those wide receivers with at least one catch in Week 5, Chris Hogan was number 2 in average depth of target. He was number 2 in yards per reception, and he was number 1 in yards per target. The reason I love Chris Hogan is because he was playing 85% of the snaps the last 2 weeks before he got dinged up in this game. I'm hoping he's okay. Rumor has it that he is. If he's hurt, obviously that changes things. But if he's healthy, he's an 85% of the snap player. He's almost going to receive no attention by a defense, because you got to think about it. You have Gronkowski, you have Martellus Bennett, you have James White out of the backfield. LeGarrette Blount's running the ball pretty well. Julian Edelman, who sees double-digit targets with Tom Brady. Chris Hogan is going to see quality one-on-one targets a majority of the time, and that's why I like him. So him and Meredith, they're both fantastic ads. I think Brandon and I can just agree on that, whichever one you can get, because you're likely not able to get both of them. One player, Brandon, every single week, I think he pops up on our waiver wire ad list, and that's Cole Beasley. But the guy just never added. I in one league this week, I had to do it. I finally just dropped Torrey Smith, and I've given up on my dream of Torrey Smith, and it's just not going to happen. But I picked up Cole Beasley. I spot started him this week. He did fantastic for me. At least 10.6 PPR points in every game, Brandon.
Every game.
Yes. Tell me why Cole Beasley is not a wide receiver 3 in PPR leagues.
I can't do it. I don't know why people don't have him. He is clearly one of Dak Prescott's favorite people on the planet. Not even targets, people. They love each other. Yeah, I'm with you. I think, this time actually he only got 4 catches, but he finally scored a touchdown. That was part of the criticism, right? Is that he was never getting in the end zone. Although part of the problem is, again, Dak Prescott, so many passes end on the 1-yard line for that guy. Unbelievable. So it's going to get in there. I guess this is going to come down to how you feel about Tony Romo coming back. If you are worried that Tony Romo is going to come back and it is not going to be about Cole Beasley, I could understand that. I'm not quite sure if I'm willing to wait on Cole Beasley any longer, thinking that's going to be the case.
Yeah.
Because even if Romo does come back, which again, I'm not quite sure that happens, to be entirely frank. But even if he does, I think that the offense is now built in a way where they have a lot of dump off passes to Cole Beasley. That's how they run their offense right now. And it isn't just about the quarterback. It's about the entire offense and their scheme. So yeah, I'm with you. I've been a Cole Beasley believer. I think he's been in every single bargains article I've ever written for DFS. And he will continue to be until people get it together.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's like a cash game option at this point. I think it's a combination of things where Jason Witten is old and slow, like him and Antonio Gates, man. I wish those two would just ride off into the sunset, enjoy, pina colada or whatever it is they want to drink, because, man, those guys
fantastic careers.
They've been 2 of the best tight ends of all time, but man, they just look slow out there. These kids keep getting younger and younger, and they're athletes, and it's tough to keep up. And obviously, Cole Beasley is eating up those targets over the middle of the field. I think it helps that Dez Bryant is out, funnel some of those targets to Cole Beasley, but I don't think he's going anywhere. And even me being a Tony Romo supporter, I think that I've said it before, I'll say it again, that Tony Romo has been underrated his entire career.
Absolutely.
I don't see there of any reason the Cowboys should make a change if they continue to win with Dak Prescott. Like you can't just be like, oh great, you've done a great job, and we're 7-1, and but Tony's ready to come back, and we're just going to insert him into it. Like, you can't do that. You really just can't do it. You can't take away the momentum that this kid has built. Dak Prescott's playing fantastic.
And to be fair, a lot of that has been Ezekiel Elliott. There's no doubt about that. I mean, certainly the offensive line has come as advertised. He is now starting to play as advertised. So that would remain the same if Tony Romo came in. You could believe, based on logic. But I do wonder, I guess my thing is, again, to believe that Cole Beasley's productivity would take a nosedive if Tony Romo were to come back, and that's why you wouldn't add him, I think is just a moot argument. I don't think you can make that anymore.
Yeah, I think the offense is kind of built for that. And Tony Romo has always been a quick hitter in the passing game. So moving on from that, I just want to touch on, I know Stephon Diggs missed last week, but Adam Thielen and Cordarrelle Patterson. I mean, my guy, Cordarrelle Patterson, I've held on to this guy in every single dynasty league, hoping that Minnesota would cut him. But now they're using him. Charles Johnson is so bad. He's out of the picture. He's out of the picture. He's just not an NFL wide receiver, guys. Like I was never a huge Charles Johnson supporter. I'm not just saying this now. I've always been a Cordarrelle Patterson guy. Happy to see him involved. But Adam Thielen, Cordarrelle Patterson, where are you at on these two, Brandon?
I'm in the middle here. Again, you might be in a situation where you need them. I think they're both going to be a little hit or miss. I think it'll be one or the other, and I'm not quite sure what week will be what. And so that's why I'm a little bit unsteady about all of that. And again, Stephon Diggs being out obviously is part of it. But certainly, this Minnesota offense is clicking along. We have to take notice. If you're holding on, I guess I'll put it this way. I wrote an article today about Golden Tate and Michael Floyd. And I was like, what is up with these guys? And why do they have such high ownership percentages next to these other people who have some upside? Now, Michael Floyd at least has touchdown upside. Okay, maybe. But he's only caught 12 of his 33 targets.
Yeah, it's been bad.
That's incredibly terrible. 0 catches last week. And I know it was Drew Stanton, but give me a break. Other people were able to at least catch one pass. And then, Golden Tate has just been a complete and utter disaster. Now, I'm not saying that Golden Tate won't have a big game sometime, but he was supposed to have a huge game last week. If that's a huge game, I'm off. I'm done. I'm not doing it anymore. So I think that Adam Thielen is kind of one of those like boomer bust players that I'm okay during bye weeks. I don't want him to be my wide receiver 3 on a weekly basis, but I'm okay with like bye week fill in, what have you. And I think we have to kind of reassess who those people are.
Yeah, I think if Stephon Diggs is out, you could start Adam Thielen. I mean, it was a good matchup for him. Speaking of that, against Houston, it kind of matched up well for him because Kyle Rudolph couldn't be involved too much because Houston is actually very, very, very good against tight ends. And I was really weary of Kyle Rudolph last week just because of the matchup. And
I brought it up on our DFS show. I was like, he's my fade. Yeah.
Yeah, he took advantage. So, I think Brandon and I are in sync on this one. Another one, though, that we have to talk about because it seems like Steve Smith might have a high ankle sprain. If he does, those are multi-week injuries. Kamar Aiken was the one who kind of picked up some snaps in his absence this week. But Rashad Perriman has kind of he's working his way towards a full-time player. If you had to pick between Kamar Aiken or Rashad Perriman, which one would you be grabbing?
I think I'd grab Perriman. Aiken he had 0 catches last week.
Yeah, he only saw 2 targets. I mean, Kamar Aiken was someone we all had high hopes for heading into the season. We felt like, Mike Wallace was kind of, okay, he's going to be the field stretcher. We get it.
Sorry, 1 second.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I just don't know if I can trust Rashad Perriman. He's been seeing the targets. He hasn't really produced with them yet. Kamar Aiken at least showed us with volume he could produce last year. He does play the slot role in this offense, so I don't know. I mean, the fact that Trustman is leaving is going to change things in Baltimore. That he's gone. They fired Mark Trustman, if you guys missed that news. So
crazy.
Yeah, that could really
not crazy like he shouldn't have been, but just like, wow, that was a surprise, right? I was surprised. Were you surprised?
I was somewhat surprised, but the fact that Joe Flacco is underperforming, I just think that they had to find the scapegoat. And I'm not saying that Mark Trustman's a great coach. I'm not saying that at all because he's obviously not done much in a long time in the NFL. But I think he's underutilizing these receivers in their positions. I think Steve Smith should be solely a slot receiver at this point in his career.
Right.
Rashad Perriman, I mean, I didn't like him coming out of college. I know a lot of people had high hopes for him, but for me, Kamar Aiken is somebody that needs to see the field more. And if I were to add one, I mean, I guess you have to say Perriman because he's seeing more snaps. But I do think that Kamar Aiken has a more unique role in the offense, whereas Mike Wallace and Rashad Perriman are similar players in what they can do skill set wise. So if those two are out there stretching the field and Joe Flacco has a better connection with Mike Wallace, then Kamar Aiken would kind of eat that stuff up underneath. His average depth of target is much lower than Rashad Perriman. So, I mean, if you're looking for steady, consistent production while Steve Smith is out, I mean, I think it might be Kamar Aiken, but we can't say too much just because there's a new coach, and we don't know how the offense is going to be run without Mark Trestman.
Agreed.
So on the wide receivers, I don't think we need to touch on. I mean, Brian Quick and Dorial Green-Beckham, those two are names that I guess you can keep your eye on, but nothing crazy. Dorial Green-Beckham has seen his snaps go up every single week, all the way up to 50% this past week. But as we've seen, Carson Wentz is playing fantastic. He's spreading the ball around the offense. It hurts fantasy owners, but it helps actually his progression. So he's playing extremely well. But those are just names kind of in deep leagues to keep your eye on.
I will say Brian Quick, I think that it is worth saying that during bye weeks, he has some upside. I know it's crazy, and I'm sorry he's a St. Louis Ram or a Los Angeles Ram, and that freaks us all out. Now, his snap counts are not great, though. Like, he only played 44 of the 71 snaps, which, by the way, I cannot believe that Los Angeles had 71 snaps last week. That's insane to me. But, it's not fantastic, but they do definitely use him. The, percentage of time that he's actually targeted when he runs route is pretty good. So look at his points per opportunity. I just think that you can't really ignore Brian Quick especially if you're in a really deep league. And DFS, he's like bottom bargain prices every week.
Or like a GPP. He does have 3 touchdowns in his last 3 games. But moving on to tight ends before we get out of here for the day, Hunter Henry is a name that, a lot of people, once they found out that Antonio Gates was back, they were dropping him. For me, I was never into dropping him. I didn't want to start him this week because I wanted to see how the Chargers were going to use him and Gates in unison and to see, if he had standalone value. And I think that by watching the games, I think you could see Antonio Gates, as I mentioned earlier in the show, that he's just done. I mean, he's probably going to catch 5 more touchdowns because that's what it takes for him to hit that record. And I know that they want to get him that, but I would be shocked if Antonio Gates tops 300 yards for the rest of the season. He hasn't had a game this year where he's hit 30 yards. His run blocking is down. He just doesn't offer much for the Chargers anymore. And Hunter Henry, man, this guy's been super efficient. 15 targets this year. He's caught 13 of them for 231 yards, 2 touchdowns. Brandon, tell me I'm not crazy, but that Hunter Henry, he played 43 of 54 snaps this week with Antonio Gates on the field. So Hunter Henry's not going anywhere, is he?
No, absolutely. The problem is he's not going to have much touchdown upside. Again, they want to get Gates that record, and they bring Gates in there for those, opportunities. However, Henry did play in 43 of the 54 offensive snaps, and Gates only played in 18.
Yeah.
I think that's what it is moving forward.
Yeah, I think they were working him back into the offense. I do think his snaps will go up a little bit, but honestly, if you own Antonio Gates, and I know that a lot of people are like, oh, you can't sell high on Antonio Gates. You'd be surprised at how many people have nostalgia for Antonio Gates, and he scored touchdowns the last few weeks, and they're like, that's all he does is score touchdowns. If you can trade away Antonio Gates right now, I would do it because you're going to be extremely touchdown reliant. I would rather have Hunter Henry going forward. Mm-hmm. Another name we have to talk about, I don't know if I want to, but at the state of the tight end position that we're in, I think we have to talk about Charles Clay. We mentioned him, I think it was last week that we talked about him, and we were just like, he has a game every now and then, but now, he's had a couple games where he's starting to pile up he's caught 5 passes in each of the last 2 weeks. It's hard to find that in tight ends nowadays. They're lacking wide receiver production in Buffalo. LaShawn McCoy can't always be all their production. So is Charles Clay someone that people can stream, Brandon?
I mean, maybe.
Not excited about it?
No, I'm not excited about it. He's yet to score a touchdown. So the problem is if you're not in a full point PPR, he's not getting you even close to the amount of production that you need. So again, know your stats. He's never going to get over 100 yards. He got 73 this week, which was like by far his best. So you're not even going to get a 100-yard bonus or something like that. Like, it just is literally full point PPR only and in desperate situations. It's interesting. I mean, Buffalo's offense is a really weird engine that could, right? Just a weird little offense that's difficult to figure out. So, I mean, I guess, but if you're asking me, would I rather have him or Jesse James? I'm going to say Jesse James because the guy has touchdown upside. Always. He always has. I mean, and by the way, for a tight end, that's what you need. Yep. So, if he is not scoring any touchdowns, it's hard for me to endorse him.
Yeah, Jesse James, speaking of Jesse James, he's second to only Martellus Bennett in tight end touchdowns with 3 of them, which is the segue to our last point that we wanted to talk about. Jesse James and Ladarius Green. So Ladarius Green, he is eligible to come back in week 7. So not this week, but the following week, with the state of the tight end position, I'm a proponent of adding Ladarius Green where I can. You saw Jesse James perform. These guys paid Ladarius Green kind of a lot of money to come there in free agency, knowing that they wanted to add another piece to their offense. And since that time, they've lost even more pieces. So I like Ladarius Green. I don't know if I'm adding Jesse James anywhere. But what do you think about Ladarius Green? Are you with me that you think that he should be added in all formats? Or are you like, we don't really even know if he's coming back at this point?
I don't know if he's coming back, and Jesse James is now playing in almost every single offensive snap. I just think he has won the job. He played 73 of the 77 offensive snaps last week. He's an every down guy now, and he didn't start off the season like that. So I think that actually that's not true. He actually did start off the season playing exactly 100% of the snaps. I don't think that they can trust Ladarius Green as far as they can throw him. I don't know if we can trust him as far as we can throw him. So I just think that Jesse James, again, 3 out of the 5 weeks he scored a touchdown. Is he going to be a big volume guy? Are we going to see 20-point games from him? No. But again, the floor is actually pretty high for him, and he's so involved with the offense. I think I have to buy in on him. And maybe they'll do some 2 tight end sets, although Pittsburgh doesn't traditionally do that. So that would be surprising to me. I just think Ladarius missed a lot of time. It was a very weird preseason for him. I'm just not quite sure they're ready to jump ship with Jesse James.
Yeah, they might ease him back in. But it's just like I said, I wish that we could have seen this Steelers offense with all the moving parts to it. Antonio Brown, Martavis Bryant, Sammie Coates even thrown in, mixed in there, Eli Rogers, Ladarius Green, Le'Veon Bell, like all these moving parts, and it could have been such an amazing offense, and I think it still could be next year. But guys, that's going to wrap up our Waiver Wire show for Week 6. We hope you learned something. Brandon, you have any big takeaways or anything that you wanted to say just to let them know, if there's one big thing heading into Week 6, what would your advice be?
I think my advice would be to look at your players one more time and actually see what they've been doing. And if you can, definitely follow our co-worker Nathan Jahnke on Twitter. It's so helpful to get those snap counts immediately on Sunday and Monday and to see exactly how much time people are playing, because that really is a good indicator. And I think that's why I was a little disappointed that I didn't kind of stand my ground a little bit more on this DeAndre Washington, and I kind of was like, great potential, I'll go with it, because really that was never the case when you look at the snap counts and the usage for the variety of weeks. So it's easy to get wrapped up in shiny new toys. Paxton Lynch is another one, but just actually look at the usage, make some decisions on your own as well. And we're glad that you're listening, because you know what, this extra information is what makes the difference in your fantasy leagues, especially from here on out for the rest of the season.
It really is. And the fact that a lot of people are going to run out there and go to pick up players that have been, performing, maybe they did this just this 1 week and we see that the snap counts don't exactly match up. My biggest advice for this week is that you watch who people are dropping to pick up these players. We don't think it's a huge waiver wire week, a week where you need to go out and grab as many players as you can. More sit back. I know in one league, I was able to sit back and grab Tyler Lockett, who's been he was hurt. He hasn't performed, but he's somebody on a stash on my bench, and when he's healthy, he's probably going to contribute to my fantasy team, where someone may have dropped him to pick up, who knows, Eddie Royal or something like that. So, but no, we hope you guys learned something today. We're going to be back here with you, as always, next week. You can follow Brandon on Twitter at BrandonHerFFB. That is it. Myself at Mike Tagliere NFL. And until next time, guys, lights out.